The Last Candle on the Altar, Prologue. Written by Gabriel Ndayishimiye. The candle trembles in its brass holder, its flame weak but unyielding, wavers, uncertain, pushing back against the dark. It quivers, like a condemned man kneeling before judgment, neither wholly alive nor entirely dead, suspended in purgatory, waiting for a verdict that will never come. Shadows stretch and twist, clinging to the walls like scars that refuse to fade. The altar is bare, hollow, stripped of incense, stripped of memory. The wooden pews, worn smooth by years, sit heavy in the silence. The wind cuts through the empty church, carrying dust and the scent of something old, something broken, something unforgiven. I step forward. My shadow moves on the stone floor, shifting with the light. The floor is cold beneath my feet, heavy with the weight of old prayers and forgotten footsteps. It flickers, distorting in the candle's glow. A boy, a man, something in between. Once I knelt here. I carried the water. I held the book. I rang the bell. I lit the candles. I arranged the vestments. I polished the chalice. I swung the censer, filling the air with smoke and prayer. I walked in procession, my feet steady on the cold stone. I stood beside him, waiting, always waiting. My hands, small and trembling, would fold before me, waiting for his nod. The first time I saw Padre Walter Geri, he was the tallest man I had ever known. His voice filled the church, deep and steady, the kind that made men listen and children hold their breath. It carried a weight that pressed against the walls, settled into the air like something sacred, something final. To hear him speak was to be drawn into his certainty, to feel as though the world beyond the church doors had no claim on you. His robe smelled of cedar and rain, his breath of old wine and scripture. He was a smoker too. He carried a small clay pot pipe with him, filled it with glowing embers, drawing slow, deliberate breaths as if inhaling something more than tobacco, something old, something unseen. Its scent mixed with the incense that once filled the church, blurring the lines between ritual and habit, between faith and something ancient, something heavier. We followed him, or maybe he followed us, across borders, through blood, through exile. The smoke from his pot lingered as we walked, trailing behind us like a whisper of the past, refusing to be left behind. But I know something the others will not say. I know what was done here. I know what was left behind. And I know who left it. The last time I saw him, the night was black and endless. He stood at this altar, his back straight, his hands folded over his chest like a man preparing for his own burial. His lips moved. Not in prayer, no, not in prayer. He spoke to himself, words carved from fear, from something dark and weighty pressing against his ribs. The candle burned in front of him, a dying ember barely touching the edges of the altar with its light. He faced the crucifix, staring at it the way a man looks at a stranger he once knew. His breath was slow, measured. His shoulders rose and fell, burdened by something unseen. The room was quiet, except for the wind slipping through the cracks in the old wood. He was not here to pray. He was here to listen. But the crucifix did not speak. It had nothing left to say. Then he sank to his knees. The motion was slow, deliberate. The weight of something unseen bore down on his shoulders. His breath wavered, catching in his throat, but he did not falter. The stone was cold beneath him, unyielding. The wooden floor groaned under his weight. His fingers traced the edge of the altar, hesitant, uncertain, as if seeking an answer from the cold stone. The dim light flickered over his face, carving deep shadows into his hollowed cheeks. His breath was heavy, unsteady, his shoulders trembling. I remember watching the wax drip, slow and deliberate, forming pale rivulets down the brass holder. A body melting into itself, a slow collapse. And I remember the door half open. A figure stood in the shadows, silent, watching. I could not tell if it was waiting or if it had already decided. The hush of fabric shifting, the sound of something breaking that was not glass, not wood, not metal, but something deeper, something that could not be mended. Padre Walter is gone, or so they say. But men like him do not disappear. They linger in the walls, in the wood, in the silence that never quite fades. His absence sits heavy in the dust, in the hush that settles like an unfinished prayer. No footprints, no grave. And yet, he is here. In the wind slipping through the rafters. In the uneasy creak of old wood. In the silence that refuses to settle. The old women still whisper his name over their beads, their fingers tracing old prayers into the air, their voices trembling with reverence, sorrow, and the quiet fear of something that lingers just beyond the edge of knowing. His name is in the stone, in the places where his hands once rested. His name is a wound. But I have returned, not to kneel, not to pray, to finish what should have never begun. The candle shudders, a fragile thing, yet still it fights, casting small defiant sparks into the gloom. The wax is nearly gone. One last breath, one last flicker. I reach forward. The heat brushes my skin. The flame wavers, a memory stirs, a voice, a promise. I press my fingers together, and for a moment, the warmth lingers, then nothing. The light dies, the dark stays, the church vanishes, and at last I begin.